Hi, this is Brass Check, and we're recording this on July 9th, 2021. Not sure when it will get out, but I do like to timestamp these things because a year ago, more than a year ago, someone asked me, when does this end? This being the COVID con. And my answer was, when did the Nazis voluntarily march out of Europe? Answer, never. They had to be driven out of Europe. So that's my answer then, and that's my answer now. This will go on forever. This is very similar to the 9/11 insanity. We had a catastrophic event happen ascribed to very unlikely sources, and that became the justification for wars all over the Middle East, the complete gutting of the U.S. Constitution, what's left of it, the total surveillance of every American, countless idiocies and humiliations of people at the airport and on trains, by the way, if you took an Amtrak train. And that goes on 20 years later. By the way, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary. Anybody seeing any news rumblings at all that we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11? I haven't seen one. Maybe this is the first one you've heard. We're not far from it, by the way. Usually these news ghouls and vampires can't wait to start the drumbeat for one of these anniversaries. And this one, all's quiet on the Western Front. But all is not quiet in the never-ending saga of the COVID con. We had somebody who poses as the President of the United States named Joseph Biden talk about a number of things. One of them was, if you don't, well, it's un-American not to get the vaccine. That's interesting. And this is a flashback to something that we've been talking about, again, for an excess of a year. What's going on now is highly reminiscent of what went on in World War I. There was no reason for the U.S. to be in World War I. It was a dynastic battle between members of the same family, one based in England, one based in Germany, and they were fighting it out for the control of Europe and the world. Really not our business. World War I now, don't get all confused. We got people that get their knickers in a knot when they think World War I and World War II are comparable. I'm not saying that. I'm saying World War I. And we had and still have a lot of German Americans who really weren't keen on being sent to Europe to kill their relatives, nor should they have been keen. However, the British got hold of our political machinery and our news media machinery and drove us into that war. And the point of the story is a vast, hard to comprehend how huge it was, propaganda campaign was set up so that any American that wasn't 100% for the war, and that included the food shortages, that included the financial disruption, that included what other things were? Oh, the draft. Yeah, you had to be, you not only had to agree with all those things and be fine with all those things, oh, also the gutting of U.S. hospitals. The competent doctors and nurses were taken and used for the war effort, leaving hospitals all over America with a skeletal staff, which probably does a lot to explain the so-called great influenza of 1918. By the way, so many sidebars. Reading a book about the role of hunger in World War I, in Germany, there were over 300 food riots because of food shortages. And one woman, in a letter to it, this wasn't anything about the influenza at all. This was talking about hunger. But she happened to write this following letter where she said, "I'm sick. They say it's the influenza." And to paraphrase, I think it's the crap they've been putting in our food. And this is when the German chemical industry started innovating by putting things in food that aren't food at all. They also did cute tricks like, literally, I'm not making this up, it's in a historical book, making bread with sawdust and dusting it with chalk. Yes. So if you imagine millions of people living on a diet like that for months and years at a time, are we surprised that the mortality rate might have gone up a little bit? But of course, we can't talk about that when we talk about the great influenza, which originally killed 20 million, which they only counted in the 1920s. And then in the 1980s, so many decades later, they realized, oh, it wasn't 20, it was 50. And then a whole bunch of amateur writers said, well, they said it was 50, but it's probably 100 million. And that's the number now, folks. That's how many people died of the great influenza. Anyway, Americans were put into a mental lockstep during World War I, and basically, if you weren't with the war and the draft and every other thing, you were not a good American. People were deputized by the Department of Justice to actually rat out their neighbors. Yes, I believe it was tens of thousands of people. They were given little badges. People were jailed for speaking out against the war. So anyway, you're not a good American if you're not for the war. And now Biden will tell you you're not a good American if you don't get your vaccinations. And so this is deja vu all over again. And of course, we've heard that the great father, Joe Biden, is going to send people door to door to make sure you've gotten your vaccination. And in a recent press conference, one of the news media stooges asked a completely bogus question. Do you think we need to go back to lockdown? What would you say? What would President Biden say about that? Now I ask you, even the most lunatic person out there who's gone along with every ounce of this nonsense, are they really thinking and talking about the need for new lockdowns? No, they're not. Normal people certainly aren't. But somehow this news media professional asked this question, and the answer from the only person who seems to be able to string two sentences together coherently, Biden's press secretary, said, we're going to leave that up to the states. And by saying that, what did she do? She left the door open for more lockdowns. What are the two big dangers facing the world, the planet now? Well, climate change, of course, we'll get to that later. But meanwhile, the great threat to humanity is the variants. Oh my God, we've never had variants of a virus before. We don't know what to do. We're at a complete loss. Boy, that was brilliant, by the way. Whoever came up with that, I hope they got a gold star and a bonus. And then the next thing we're being told is the other great danger to humanity is the unvaccinated. And all over the world, they are using ridiculous metrics. They're not judging how many people are sick. They're judging as to whether they're going to return to normality. They're judging the percentage of people who have been vaccinated. That's going on all over the world, and it's certainly going on in the U.S., and that was the big problem on July 4th, according to President Biden, that we didn't reach our vaccination goal. And if you're not getting a vaccination, you are not a good American. So my answer to people who asked me a year ago, when does this end? It never ends until we end it. And what are the prospects of that? Well, I continue to be dismayed at the lack of resistance in the U.S. However, I do see, that's not really well reported, but I do see parents and families standing up to these criminal school boards. I don't know that they're all staffed by criminals, but boy, everyone I've ever looked into it has been. Hoboken, the mafia used to run the school board, and they used to have teachers that would get salaries and didn't even teach classes. I mean, it was incredible. We have something different but similar right here in beautiful Red Hook, New York, where they'll spend $1 million on this and $1 million on that, and then one day the guy that was supposed to be counting all the money just disappeared after 17 years. And when we asked where he went, we were told, none of your business. How do you like that? Now, how many school boards are there? And I bet if someone were to calculate all the theft and fraud and incompetence in the management of public schools as administered by these criminal school boards, that the amount of money in total would be close to what the Pentagon burns every year. So I'm glad to see resistance at the school board level, where parents, of course, they're terrible pushback. We've run stories where there was one school board member that decided that any parent that spoke out against the masking or the other abuses of children should have their employers called. Yeah, they did it. Had the woman's job terminated. Who knows? And that's just these are just the tips of the iceberg. We have no idea how much of this is going on all over the country. I do hope it leads to a great awakening, because we need it. And number two, I think, think of all these mothers who previously were usually working full-time jobs, frankly happy to park their kids in public school and not have to worry about it. And now they changed the deal. Now it's like, well, maybe we'll serve you. Maybe we'll teach your kids. Maybe we won't. Depends on our mood. Depends on how we feel. And in the meantime, you can be responsible during the day. That was the bargain. Give us your kids for the day, and then you can go and work. And we'll more or less take care of them. We'll give them a half-assed education. We'll propagandize them, but they'll be reasonably safe. That deal changed, didn't it? Now it's like, well, we reserve the right to shut the public. By the way, you're paying a lot of taxes for those public schools. Well, that doesn't matter. But we reserve the right to shut it down anytime. So what they've done, perhaps unwittingly, is woken up a whole lot of moms to the realization that they and their families are being screwed. And if these folks ever go beyond the COVID issue and look at all the other abuses that go on in public schools, all the theft, all the waste, all the insanity, we could have a really good movement on our hands. So I'm hopeful about that. But other than that, I don't see a whole lot of action in the United States, which is a shame, because we really need it. And this ain't going to stop. They have no intention of stopping. One of the vaccine makers is now talking about a booster shot. Why? The variant. Didn't we predict this in March of 2020? Didn't we say if this started, it would never stop? That once they were able to create mass vaccination hysteria beyond, remember they did it for kids in 2018-19, the entirely bogus measles scam. And I did say, you're next, folks. Best pay attention. Best support these kids and their families. But the kids and their families were basically left to their own devices. So we're getting what we get. In a little historical context, for people that are interested in that kind of thing, reading about how did the Roman Empire turn from a pagan religion to one where Roman Catholicism was the official religion. Now, if you're Catholic, please don't take offense. I'm just talking about history here. I know that there's a difference between faith and in the criminal conduct of the people that run the show, but things have to be talked about. And it's most interesting because I think we're going now, and of course paganism is presented as this evil religion, this evil thing. Well, our Native Americans were pagans. Were they evil? There were some really upright individuals. People like Marcus Aurelius and all the classic Romans and Greeks were pagans. Were they evil people? But anyway, paganism, whatever that even means, has been painted with a black brush as a terrible, terrible thing. Our brothers and sisters in Africa, who are some of the most heartful, decent human beings on earth, Some of them are pagans, you know. But in any event, there was a war between uh, multi-deity religion and single deity religion. And so let's talk about how that happened, because think about it. The Roman Empire was multi-deity. They were not doing this single deity thing. But they eventually did. So how did that happen? And here's how it happened. So you had a guy named Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, and for whatever reason, he came to the conclusion that this one God deal is way better than this multi-God deal. And he was emperor. So he couldn't quite change the religion overnight, the official religion overnight. So what he did was he empowered the bishops. So there was a structure of the old church, the pre-Roman church. And, like every human structure, it had leaders and so on, and those leaders were bishops. So basically, Constantine co-opted the bishops by giving them temporal powers that they'd never had before. They suddenly became important people in civil society, not just among the early Christians. Then once he gave these guys power and status that they'd never had before, and they loved it, by the way, they loved it. They were more than happy to jump on board the official Roman bandwagon because there were a lot of perks. They came up with their creed, the Nicene Creed. And basically it was like, okay, here's what you must believe. Right? No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And they listed all the different things that to be a good Constantine Catholic, you had to believe. And they nailed those down. So now we've got an emperor who is nominally a Christian. And then what else do we have? We have these former independent church leaders who are now bigger than their britches under the Roman Empire's wing, getting all kinds of perks and benefits. And in addition, and in exchange for that, they of course would bow to the emperor. And then the emperor said, well, we need a thing that everybody's got to believe. And so they all met and they came together and they came up with this thing that everyone must believe. Does this sound familiar to anybody? But wait, there's more. It wasn't possible to make Christianity the state religion right away, because that would have caused a lot of people weren't down for that. So they let some time pass and they built their network. And one of the things they did was give special benefits to Christians that you wouldn't get if you were a non-Christian. Towns that were Christian, and again, I'm putting Christian in quotes because, it's like saying Jewish. What does that even mean? There's the vast spectrum of people who are Jewish. You have people that are atheists who are Jewish, and then you have people that are more devout than the devout, and then you have everybody in between. So these terms really don't mean a whole lot. But in any event, in that part of that time of the Roman Empire, if you were a good Constantine type Christian, and your town was a Christian town, in quotes, you got to be designated as a city. Okay, you see this how they gave special benefits, right? You got your 2 vaccinations, now you can take your mask off because you're a believer. You follow the creed. We have a creed that is not subject to debate. It's certainly not subject to scientific inquiry. It's a creed. And while we can't force you to roll up your sleeve and take every goddamn vaccination we come up with, we can punish you subtly for not doing it. And we can also reward the true believers. You see how that works? Tried and true. Then as time went on, it became more important to be a Christian than a Roman citizen. Okay, and again, it's Christian in quotes. I'm not talking about anybody's variety of Christianity. I'm talking about this Roman Christian concept. It gradually became more important. Your destiny was more likely to be determined, what was to be determined, more, let's see, the influence on your temporal destiny had more to do with being a Christian than being a Roman citizen. That was a complete reversal of everything the Roman Empire originally stood for. It was all about being a citizen. Well, with the gradual takeover of the Roman Empire by this new method of social control, and again, don't take offense if you're Roman Catholic, please. If you don't think it's a well-oiled social control machine, come on. You know, I'm not saying great people have not come out of the Roman Catholic Church, but let's be real about what the Roman Catholic Church is. It's a social control power machine. So in any event, they morphed from it's okay to be a Christian, again in quotes, to if you're a Christian, you get some special perks, to if you want to get ahead in this world, best be a Christian. And that's how the Roman Empire became, quote, Christianized. Now, I think anybody over the mental age of 4 would realize that this was a distortion and a dilution of any positive Christian principles that originally existed. And this really just became a power thing and a social control thing and a way of organizing people. But this is exactly what's happening today. So it used to be doctors could have their idiot opinions. The pharma companies could have their idiot opinions. And anybody so unfortunate as to listen to them uncritically, well, you know, unfortunately, you're going to pay the price for doing that. But it was okay to not go along. It was okay to question them. It was okay to ask scientific questions. But that changed, didn't it, with the vaccine business, didn't it? You can't question vaccination of children. Your child either gets vaccinated or your child does not go to school. The day that was announced, there should have been riots in the streets. But nothing happened. That was the Rubicon. That's when they crossed the line, and to their amazement, I'm sure, nobody said a word. But that was criminality with a capital C. And so we went along with that. We even had a county administrator in Rockland County who proposed permanent quarantine of any in-house quarantine of any child not vaccinated. No library, no playground, no park, no nothing. You don't leave that house till you're vaccinated. Luckily, that did get shot down. But anyway, that line got crossed. And, you know, it's that old saying, they came for the trade union, they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I didn't say a word. They came for the trade unionists, but I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't say a word. They came for the Jews, but I'm not a Jew, so I didn't say a word. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to say a word. And we threw families and children to the wolves when we let them do this. And now they've escalated it. And now it's everybody gets vaccinated whenever we say so. And you know what? We got a booster shot coming. Why? Because of the variants. And if you don't get one, you're selfish and you're not a good American. This transition is not over, okay? Just like the transition from we'll tolerate Christians to we'll treat Christians with special privileges to if you want to get ahead in this world, you better be a Christian. We haven't gone the full spectrum yet. However, in medicine, in public health, in what is called the news media, I really think it should be called the corporate lying machine, staffed by corrupt idiots, self-important idiots. That would be a more accurate description of what the news media is. However, so if you want to be in those professions, we are already at the place where you either sign up for the creed or you're not employable. You're not employable as a journalist. You're not employable as a doctor. You can have private practice, I guess, though they will gladly try to run you out of business. You can't be employed as a doctor. You can't be employed as a teacher. Certainly not as a school administrator. You see the list of professions that you cannot be a member of if you do not sign up for the vaccination creed. And let's be clear, the vaccination creed says whatever pharma says goes. And we'll call it science. We'll say we're following the science. We don't know any science. We haven't looked at any science. Every time Fauci opens his mouth, it's a different version of science, but we will call it following the science. And we'll even put a lawn sign on our lawn saying science is real. Have you seen these signs? So the agenda of a medical dictator. We don't have military dictatorships anymore where the army takes over. We have medical dictatorships, medical fascism, and that's absolutely what we're living through. And I was talking about this way before COVID. We were already in a medical dictatorship, it just wasn't obvious. So who else did this besides the Roman Empire? Let's call it the Roman Empire Catholic Church, because that's what it was. There was a Roman Empire, and then it became Christian. And that became the official religion, which meant it was the only acceptable religion. All right. Who else has played this game? Well, look at Nazi Germany. They became a point where, and this wasn't limited to Jews, by the way. If you stood up and had anything negative to say about the regime, you were in mortal peril. You were heading to a camp, or you might just be beaten or killed on the spot. So this was a whole population of Europe. How this got boiled down to one group of people, I don't understand. This was the entirety of every place the Nazis occupied. And plenty of people were pulled off the streets and sent to slave labor camps and worked to death and murdered, of all backgrounds. So if you had a different opinion, best keep it to yourself. And if you wanted to have a good temporal experience, a good material life, best put on the armband, which is what the medical profession did during World War II in Germany. And let us, if you didn't know that, now you know it, and let us never forget it, and let us never stop meditating on it. The profession, the single profession in Germany during the Hitlerzeit, during Nazi time, that joined the party. We're not talking about went along. We're not talking about kept their heads down. We're talking about joined the party and all it stood for. One profession and stood head and shoulders above all the rest in terms of accepting Nazi dogma, and that was the MDs. And then, not surprisingly, it became very uncomfortable to disagree or to be a Jewish doctor. Now, for historical reasons, medicine has attracted lots of talent from the Jewish people, and there were a lot of great Jewish physicians in Germany and in other places in Europe. Professors, heads of medical schools, heads of hospitals, heads of departments, researchers, clinicians. Guess what happened to their jobs? Guess who took their jobs over during World War II in Germany? Can anybody tell me any meaningful difference between what's going on, what went on then and what's going on now? If you do not sign up for the vaccine creed, which is very simple, the creed states vaccines are always good, and any vaccine we decree you get, and any questioning of that is un-American, unscientific, and selfish. That's the creed. Okay? So we've had whole professions completely gutted and replaced with these people. Public health people, school administrators, teachers to a degree, though thank God not all of them, doctors that work for hospitals, doctors that are dependent on grant money for their research, academic physicians, they're all gone. It's all members of people who accept the creed. So this is where we're at, and I wish I could give cheery analysis here, but you start to fix something when you look at the reality of it. And again, if you ask me when does this end, I'll ask you, it ends with the same probability that the Nazis would have just said, we're done. We overdid it. We overextended ourselves a bit. We overreached. We're going to march out of Poland. We're going to march out of Czechoslovakia. We're going to march out of France. We're going to go back and behave like sane individuals. That didn't happen, and it's not going to happen in this case either. So if you're a supporter of Brass Check, thank you very much. There aren't many places left that are talking in realistic terms about what we're facing. If you're not a supporter, you might consider becoming one. We are just trying to pay our server, email, and tech helper bill. And we get close sometimes, but it'll be nice if we hit it every month. And spread the word. And I know there's a lot of people that think this way and would be receptive to this kind of message, and they're not getting it. And I do have to say I've reached out to every progressive, hard-hitting, independent journalist out there. They're not interested. I think I was interviewed twice in the last 18 months. And not invited back, by the way. So, for whatever reason, this message is unpalatable. But it's, I think, something we need to hear and something we need to look at. So this has been Brass Check, recording this on July 9th, 2021.